Please, just one round. The whisper hung heavy in the silence of the penthouse kitchen. Amara's hands froze on the porcelain plate she was scrubbing. The warm water ran over her fingers, but her blood turned to ice. She hadn't heard him enter. Kang Min-jae stood in the doorway. It was past midnight, and the terrifying King of Seoul looked like a man unraveling. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing the dark ink of the dragon tattoos that coiled up his neck, a stark contrast against the pale skin that usually terrified his enemies. His eyes, usually cold and dead, were burning with a desperation that made Amara's breath catch in her throat. "Master Kang, I—" She turned, pressing her lower back against the marble counter, trapping herself. "I shouldn't be here. It's late. I know you heard the call, Amara." He stepped closer, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Amara could smell him now, expensive whiskey, cedar, and the metallic tang of gun oil. "I know you heard what my lieutenant said to me." Heat flooded her dark skin. She had heard. Earlier that evening, while dusting the hallway, she had overheard the impossible. Kang Min-jae, the monster of the underworld, being mocked by his own right-hand man. She had witnessed the betrayal that was about to end his life. "I should go to my room," she whispered, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. She couldn't move, not when he was looking at her like that, like she was the only anchor in a storm. "Just one round, Amara." His voice was raw, a cracked ruin of his usual command. "Not for pleasure, just stay. Let me be a man, not a king, for one moment." This was dangerous. He was the most lethal man in Korea. She was a maid with a forged passport and a past she was running from. She had come to Seoul to disappear, to be invisible. Not this, not him. But when he placed his hands on the counter on either side of her hips, boxing her in, her body betrayed every survival instinct she had. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, his dark hair falling over his eyes. "We can't," she breathed, her voice trembling. "If they find out, I don't care." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Tell me to stop. Tell me to walk away." She should. God, she should run. But looking at the exhaustion etched into his beautiful, terrifying face, Amara forgot about the violent past she fled in Nigeria. She forgot about the danger of his world. "I can't," she whispered. He didn't kiss her. He simply rested his forehead against hers, a surrender so intimate it felt more dangerous than a gunshot. And in that silence, Amara realized she had made a fatal error. She hadn't just uncovered a conspiracy, she had let the monster in. "Stop. You're already hooked, aren't you? You want to know if she survives the monster." Most people just take the entertainment and run, leaving Amara to face him alone. Don't be that person. If you want to see her make it out alive, you owe it to the story to subscribe right now. Don't let her fight this alone. 3 months earlier, Amara Okoye had stepped off the plane at Incheon International Airport with nothing but a fake name and a trembling determination to survive. Seoul had stretched out before her like a glittering foreign galaxy. She tightened her grip on the handle of her battered suitcase. She wasn't here for K-pop or culture. She was here because it was the farthest place on Earth from the blood-soaked memories of Lagos she needed to outrun. The immigration officer squinted at the passport, the fluorescent lights of Incheon Airport humming a low, nervous frequency in Amara's ears. "Purpose of visit?" he asked in clipped English. "Work," Amara replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Domestic assistance." The officer stamped the booklet with a heavy thud. "Welcome to Korea, Ms. Okoye." Amara released a breath she felt she had been holding since Lagos. She took the document back with trembling fingers. The name Amara Okoye was a shield, a fabrication purchased with the last of her family's hidden savings. The woman she used to be, the university scholar, the daughter of a vocal political activist, had died in the fire that consumed her childhood home. As she walked into the biting Seoul winter, she didn't feel the cold. She only felt the phantom heat of that night in Nigeria. The smell of gasoline, the shouting of men in military fatigues, and the silence that followed the gunshots. She had run then, and she hadn't stopped running until she reached a place where no one knew her name. Anonymity was her only goal. She needed to disappear. 2 weeks later, Amara sat in the pristine, sterile office of a high-end employment agency. "You are overqualified," the recruiter noted, tapping a pen against Amara's falsified yet modest resume. "Your English is perfect. You have university credits. Why a live-in maid position?" Amara lowered her gaze, shrinking herself into the chair. She had learned quickly that in order to survive, she had to be harmless. She had to bury her intelligence deep beneath a mask of obedience. "I just want a quiet life, ma'am," Amara said softly. "I am hard-working. I do not ask questions. I simply wish to serve." The recruiter studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There is a client, a very particular client in Gangnam. The pay is triple the standard rate, but the turnover is high. He requires absolute silence and discretion. Can you handle that?" "Yes," Amara said. She didn't ask who the client was. She didn't care. The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel. It sat atop the city like a crown, cold and detached. Amara's first meeting with Kang Min-jae happened on her third day. She was polishing the long mahogany dining table when the elevator doors slid open. The staff, a cook and two other cleaners, immediately ceased their chatter and bowed low, eyes fixed on the floor. Amara mimicked them, her heart giving a nervous flutter. Kang walked past them as if they were furniture. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit that cost more than Amara would earn in a decade. He was undeniably striking, sharp jawline, jet black hair styled with precision. But the air around him was frigid. He paused near the table, his hand resting on the back of a chair. He didn't look at her, but he spoke. "The windows in the study," he said, his voice deep and devoid of emotion. "There is a smudge." "I will clean it immediately, sir," Amara whispered. He turned then, his gaze sweeping over her. For a split second, their eyes met. Amara expected cruelty, or perhaps the arrogance of a wealthy tyrant. Instead, she saw a terrifying emptiness. His eyes were hollow, like a house that had burned down from the inside, leaving only the facade standing. He nodded once, polite but distant, and walked away. The illusion of the polite businessman shattered a week later. It was past 2 in the morning. Amara had woken up thirsty and crept to the kitchen for water. The penthouse was silent, bathed in the blue glow of the city lights below. She turned the corner into the living area and froze. Kang was there. He wasn't wearing the suit. He sat on the edge of the sprawling leather sofa, shirtless, a glass of amber liquid dangling from his hand. Amara gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. In the dim light, the truth of his life was written on his skin. A massive, intricate dragon tattoo coiled around his torso, its claws digging into his chest, but it was the scars that held her attention. Jagged, ugly lines of white tissue crisscrossed his ribs and back, marks of violence, of blades and bullets. He looked up sharply, hearing her gasp. For a moment, the King of Seoul looked utterly human. His hair was messy, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. The hollow look in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, defensive glint. He looked dangerous, yes, a lethal predator caught in his den, but he also looked agonizingly wounded. I am sorry, sir," Amara stammered, stepping back into the shadows. "I didn't know." Kang didn't yell. He didn't order her out. He just watched her retreat, his expression unreadable, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Amara hurried back to her room, her heart pounding. She had come here to hide from monsters, only to realize she was living in the lair of one. But as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the image of the scars on his back and the terrible loneliness in his eyes. Silence was the loudest thing in the penthouse. Over the next 2 weeks, Amara learned the rhythm of Kang Min-jae's life, and it was a rhythm of suffocating isolation. He rose at 4 in the morning. He drank his espresso black, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at a city that seemed to bow beneath him. He ate dinner alone at the long mahogany table, the scraping of his silverware the only sound in the vast room. There were no friends, no laughter, no women, just men in dark suits who whispered into earpieces and bowed too low, their eyes filled with terror. "They call him the Ghost, the head cook, Mrs. Han," whispered one afternoon while chopping scallions with aggressive speed, "because by the time you see him, you are already dead." Amara listened, but she didn't reply. The rumors painted a portrait of a sadist, a man who broke fingers for a missed payment and burned down buildings for an insult. But the man Amara saw was different. She saw the way he paused to look at a withered plant in the hallway, or how he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't a monster reveling in power. He was a prisoner serving a life sentence in a cell made of gold. The contradiction unsettled her. It made her curious. And in her world, curiosity got you killed. The shift happened on a Tuesday night. The house was asleep, bathed in the low, ambient hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic. Amara was in the kitchen, wiping down the marble island under the warm glow of the pendant lights. She didn't hear him enter. One moment she was alone, the next, the air in the room grew heavier, charged with a sudden electric pressure. Amara stiffened, her hand freezing on the countertop. She could feel the heat radiating from behind her. He was close, too close. "You are always cleaning," a deep voice murmured, vibrating through the small space between them. Amara turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kang stood directly behind her, trapping her against the island. He wasn't wearing his jacket, his white shirt glowing softly in the dim light, sleeves rolled up to reveal the forearms that terrified half of Seoul. He didn't back away. He stood inside her personal space, his dark eyes tracking over her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. "It is my job, sir," she managed to say, clutching the cleaning cloth like a shield. "Is it?" Kang tilted his head, studying her. "You don't scrub like a maid, Amara. You scrub like you are trying to erase something." The observation was so sharp, so accurate, that Amara almost flinched. She looked down, unable to hold his gaze. "We all have things we wish to wash away, Master Kang." For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, thick with tension. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder, and for a terrifying second, Amara thought he might touch her. She thought he might bridge the gap between master and servant. "You have a calmness," he said quietly, his voice dropping to a husky register. "Everyone in this house smells of fear. But you are just quiet." "I am afraid too," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Good," he said, and the words sounded like a lament. "Fear keeps you alive." He stepped back then, the spell breaking. The cold distance returned to his eyes, masking whatever vulnerability had just surfaced. Without another word, he turned and vanished into the shadows of the hallway. Amara gripped the counter, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her pulse was racing, not just from fear, but from something darker, something magnetic. As she hurried back to the servants' quarters, she passed the security room near the service elevator. The door was cracked open an inch. "He's losing focus," a rough voice muttered. Amara recognized it as Choi, one of the newer bodyguards. "Doesn't matter," another voice replied, lower, sharper. "The shipment is next week. If he isn't ready, the board will replace him." permanently. Amara didn't stop. She kept walking, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. But the words chilled her blood more than Kang's proximity ever could. Replace him. In the world of the syndicate, there was no retirement. Replacement meant death. She entered her small room and locked the door, her back sliding down the wood. She had come to Seoul to escape violence, but tonight, standing in that kitchen, she realized two things. Kang Min-jae was a man walking toward a cliff, and she was the only one watching him fall. The west wing of the penthouse was strictly forbidden to most staff, a corridor of dark wood and soundproof doors, where the true machinery of Kang Min-jae's empire turned. But on Thursdays, the cleaning crew had a 15-minute window to polish the floors while the security detail rotated. Amara moved quickly, the soft shh of her mop the only sound in the oppressive silence. She kept her head down, her heart doing a nervous double time. She hated this wing. The air here felt heavier, smelling of stale cigar smoke and old secrets. She reached the heavy double doors of the private conference room. They were supposed to be locked. They weren't. A sliver of light cut across the hallway floor. Amara froze, gripping the mop handle until her knuckles turned white. She turned to leave, to flee before she was seen, but a voice drifted through the crack, low, smooth, and chillingly familiar. It was Director Park, Kang's right hand, the man who poured Kang's drinks and guarded his back. Thursday. Midnight, Park said. He wasn't speaking to anyone in the room. He was on the phone. He's insisting on inspecting the Incheon shipment personally. No security detail. He wants to keep it quiet. Amara pressed herself against the wall, her breath trapped in her lungs. This wasn't a business call. The tone was wrong. It was too secretive, too smug. Don't worry, Park continued, his voice dropping an octave. He's distracted, weak. He spends his nights staring at the city lights like a poet. A cruel chuckle followed. He's losing control. He won't survive the next phase. Make sure your men are ready. He won't survive. The world tilted on its axis. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just gossip. This was an execution order. The man she had seen agonizing over his own scars, the man who had looked at her with such desperate exhaustion, was being sold out by the only person he trusted. A floorboard creaked under her foot. Inside the room, the voice stopped instantly. Amara didn't wait. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She grabbed her bucket and sprinted silently back down the corridor, her heart thundering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She made it around the corner just as the heavy door creaked open behind her. That evening, the penthouse felt like a tomb. Amara was tasked with serving dinner. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the wine decanter with both hands to keep it steady. Every shadow looked like Director Park. Every silence felt like a prelude to violence. Kang sat at the head of the table, alone as always. He was staring at his plate, his food untouched. Amara approached to refill his water glass. As she leaned in, the crystal pitcher rattled against the rim of his goblet. Clink. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Kang's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron, immovable, but not painful. "You are shaking," he said. It wasn't a question. Amara looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I am sorry, sir. I am clumsy tonight." "You are not clumsy," Kang replied, his voice low. He didn't let go of her wrist. He turned his chair slightly, forcing her to face him. His dark eyes searched hers, peeling back the layers of her defense. "You have been terrified since you walked in here tonight. More than usual." He pulled her slightly closer. The heat of his hand on her skin made her dizzy. "What did you see, Amara?" The truth clawed at her throat. "Director Park is selling you. You are going to die on Thursday." But if she spoke and she was wrong, or if Park found out, she would disappear. She was a maid with a fake passport. No one would look for her body. But looking at Kang, seeing the exhaustion etched into the lines of his face, the moral weight of her silence crushed her. Her voice cracked. She looked up, and for a fleeting second, she saw the man behind the monster waiting for her to speak. "Sir," she whispered, her eyes darting to the doorway where the guard stood. "Sometimes, the people closest to the throne are the ones chipping away the legs." Kang went still. His thumb brushed the pulse point of her wrist, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heart. He understood. He didn't look at the guards. He didn't shout. He simply stared at her with a terrifying intensity, a dawn of realization breaking behind his eyes. "Pour the wine," he said softly, releasing her wrist. Amara obeyed, her legs trembling. She had just stepped into the line of fire. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was an accomplice to the king's survival. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private library, dissolving the city lights into a blur of weeping neon. Kang stood by the glass, his reflection ghostly against the storm outside. He hadn't dismissed Amara after dinner. Instead, he had summoned her here. "Pour me another," he said, not turning around. Amara moved to the crystal decanter on the heavy oak desk. Her hands were steadier now, but her heart was still frantic. The air in the room felt pressurized, suffocating. "Do you know how I became the head of this family, Amara?" The question stopped her. She held the glass, watching his broad back. "No, sir." "My uncle," Kang murmured, his voice sounding far away. "He raised me after my parents died. He taught me how to wear a suit, how to hold a gun, how to smile while ordering an execution." He turned slowly, taking the glass from her. His fingers brushed hers, ice against fire. "And on my 25th birthday, he tried to put a bullet in the back of my head because he feared I was becoming stronger than him." He took a slow drink, the amber liquid disappearing. "Betrayal is not a risk in my world, Amara. It is an inheritance." Amara looked at him. Really looked at him. The King of Seoul was gone. In his place was a man hollowed out by a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. The exhaustion in his posture wasn't physical. It was the bone-deep weariness of a soul that had forgotten how to rest. She felt a crack in her own armor. She knew what it was to lose family. She knew what it was to be hunted. Against every instinct of self-preservation, she stepped closer. "You are tired of being the monster they expect," she said softly. Kang looked at her, startled. The mask slipped completely. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of death, but fear of the emptiness consuming him. "I am tired of being alone in a room full of people," he confessed. He set the glass down with a heavy clink. "Now tell me, what did you hear?" Amara took a deep breath. There was no going back. "Director Park," she whispered. "I heard him on the phone. He said you are losing control, that you are weak." Kang's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He didn't speak. He mentioned a shipment. "Thursday. Midnight. Incheon." Amara's voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "He told the person on the other end to make sure their men were ready. He said you wouldn't survive the next phase." The silence that followed was absolute. Kang closed his eyes. He didn't rage. He didn't throw the glass. He simply bowed his head, as if the weight of the truth was a physical stone placed on his neck. "Park," he breathed. "My brother in everything but blood." He opened his eyes and looked at Amara. The intensity of his gaze pinned her to the spot. He took a step toward her, crossing the invisible boundary between master and servant. "Why tell me?" he asked, his voice rough. "You could have stayed silent. You could have let me walk into the trap. If Park finds out you know, he will kill you." "I know," Amara said, her chin lifting slightly. "But I have seen what men like that do. And I could not watch you die." Kang stared at her, stunned. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her face. His thumb brushed the high curve of her cheekbone. It was a touch of reverence, not Possession. Amara stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the heat of his hand and the dark, desperate ocean of his eyes. Everyone else in the city looks at me and sees a paycheck, or a target, or a monster, Kang whispered, his face inches from hers. You look at me, and you just see me. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. The contact sent a shockwave through her body, terrifying and electric. He wasn't kissing her, but this intimacy was far more dangerous. Why is it only you? He rasped, his breath warm against her skin. Why is it only you who can make me feel human? Amara didn't have an answer. She only knew that in the center of this dangerous, violent empire, she had found the one thing she never expected to find: a reason to stay. This man is on his knees begging for a single human connection. If you're watching this deep into the story and haven't subscribed, you're just another cold pair of eyes staring at him. Prove you have a heart. Don't leave them in the dark. Press the button. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from cold to suffocating. In the days following the revelation in the library, Kang Min-jae stopped acting like a ghost and started acting like a guard dog. Wherever Amara went, dusting the hallways, polishing the glass balcony doors, folding laundry in the service room, she felt his eyes on her. He intercepted a security guard who spoke too casually to her, his voice low and lethal, sending the man pale with terror. He rearranged the shift schedules so only Amara brought him his meals. The staff noticed. He watches you, Mrs. Han whispered one morning, her eyes darting nervously toward the security cameras, like a dragon guarding a pearl. It is not safe, child. When the king favors a servant, the court sharpens its knives. Amara kept her head down, but her heart was a constant drumbeat of anxiety. She wasn't just afraid of the staff. She was afraid of the storm gathering around Kang. On Friday afternoon, the storm broke. Amara was clearing a tea tray from the strategy room. Director Park had just left, his cologne lingering in the air like a sickness. On the table, he had left a crumpled notepad. Amara smoothed it out before tossing it into the bin. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a meeting agenda. It was a timeline. Tuesday, the docks. Euro 200. Clean sweep. It was the coup. They weren't just going to replace him, they were going to slaughter him, and everyone loyal to him. That night, sleep was impossible. The penthouse was silent, but it felt like the silence before a bomb detonation. Driven by a restless panic, Amara went to the kitchen. She needed water. She needed to think. She was standing at the sink, staring blankly at the dark window, when the air pressure in the room dropped. "You're awake." The voice came from directly behind her. Amara spun around, her back colliding with the marble counter. Kang was there. He had moved silently, a phantom in the dark. He looked shattered. His dress shirt was unbuttoned, his hair wild, the shadows under his eyes purple and bruised. He didn't look like a mafia boss. He looked like a man who had been awake for 100 years. "Master Kang," she breathed, gripping the edge of the counter. I found something. Park, I don't care about Park," Kang interrupted, his voice rough, bordering on delirious. He stepped closer, invading her space, until his chest was inches from hers. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of her, boxing her in. It was the exact pose from the rumors, the exact tension she had feared, but there was no aggression in him. Only a terrifying, shaking need. "I can't hear the reports anymore, Amara," he whispered. "I can't listen to the lies. I look at them, and I see knives. Everyone is a knife." He looked down at her, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing a map. "Except you." "Sir, please," Amara stammered, her pulse racing in her throat. "You need to rest. You need to prepare." "I don't want to prepare." The shout cracked his voice, raw and broken. He dropped his forehead, resting it against the curve of her shoulder. The mighty King of Seoul was trembling against her. "I am so tired," he rasped into the fabric of her uniform. Amara froze. His vulnerability was heavier than his anger. She raised a hand, hovering it over his back, unsure whether to push him away or comfort him. He lifted his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The desperation in them stole the air from her lungs. "Just one round. Please," he whispered. Amara's breath hitched. "Sir?" "Not for pleasure," he said quickly, his voice cracking. "Just one round where I don't have to be the king. Just one moment where I'm not alone." He wasn't asking for her body. He was begging for her humanity. He was asking to be held, to be seen, to be anchored by the one person who didn't want anything from him. Amara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the boy who had been betrayed by his uncle. She saw the man who was about to face a firing squad on Tuesday. She should run. She should push him away and retreat to her room. But the fear in her chest was replaced by a surge of fierce, protective sorrow. "Okay," she whispered. She didn't run. Instead, she stepped forward, closing the final inch between them. The Tuesday night gathering was supposed to be a peace summit. 12 of the syndicate's highest-ranking lieutenants sat around the long, ebony table, the air thick with cigar smoke and forced laughter. Amara moved invisibly along the perimeter, refilling crystal tumblers with aged scotch. Her hands were steady, but her stomach churned. The tension she had felt for days had coalesced into a suffocating density. Director Park sat at Kang's right hand. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat, dead things. "More ice," Park said, lifting his glass without looking at her. Amara took the glass and retreated to the service bar in the hallway. As she tonged the ice, she saw Park's reflection in the hallway mirror. He wasn't watching the table. He was touching his earpiece, his lips moving barely an inch. Amara froze, straining to hear over the low hum of conversation. "In position," a tinny voice replied in his ear. "On your signal. The girl too. No witnesses." The ice cube slipped from the tongs and hit the floor. The girl too. The timeline had changed. They weren't waiting for the docks. They were going to kill him here. Now. Panic, cold and electric, surged through Amara. If she ran, she might live. If she stayed, she was dead. She looked at the service exit, the path to freedom. Then she looked back at the dining room, where Kang sat, tired and unsuspecting, surrounded by wolves. She didn't think. She didn't breathe. She grabbed a heavy crystal pitcher of water and sprinted back into the room. "Master Kang!" she screamed, her voice shattering the sophisticated silence. "It's a trap! They have guns!" The room froze. For a split second, time suspended. Kang looked up, confusion warring with instinct. Director Park stood up slowly, the smile dropping from his face like a mask. He didn't deny it. He simply sighed, reaching inside his jacket. "I told you she was a liability, Min-jae." "Park," Kang said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Sit down. It's over," Park spat. "The families are tired of a king who bleeds. Take him." Around the table, 4 other lieutenants stood up, drawing suppressed pistols from their holsters. The betrayal was absolute. Kang was surrounded. A gunman near the window raised his weapon, aiming directly at Kang's chest. "No!" Amara shrieked. She hurled the heavy crystal pitcher with all her strength. It wasn't a tactical throw. It was a desperate heave. The heavy glass smashed into the gunman's face, shattering on impact. Ideally, a maid would be invisible. Tonight, she was the distraction that saved the king. The gunman howled, his shot going wide, shattering the window behind Kang. That split second was all Kang needed. The ghost awoke. Kang moved with a speed that blurred the eye. He kicked the chair out from under him, slamming it into Park's knees, and drew a hidden blade from his sleeve in one fluid motion. Chaos erupted. Gunshots popped like firecrackers, muffled by silencers, but deafening in the enclosed space. Amara dove behind the heavy oak sideboard, curling into a ball as glass rained down around her. She heard shouts, the sickening crunch of bone, and the wet thud of bodies hitting the floor. It was a massacre, but she couldn't tell who was winning. "Stay down!" Kang's voice roared over the din, primal and furious. Then, silence. Heavy, panting breaths filled the room. Amara slowly uncurled, trembling violently. She peeked over the sideboard. The room was a ruin. The table was overturned. 5 men lay dead or groaning on the floor. Director Park was slumped against the far wall, clutching a fatal wound in his chest, his eyes wide with shock. Kang stood in the center of the carnage. His white shirt was splattered with red, his chest heaving. He held a gun in one hand and a knife in the other. He didn't look like a victor. He looked like a man standing in the ashes of his own home. The survivors, the loyal lieutenants, were shouting orders into their phones, securing the perimeter, but Kang wasn't listening. He turned slowly, his wild eyes scanning the room until they landed on Amara. He took a step toward her, then stopped. He looked at the blood on his hands, then at her terrified face. The horror of what she had just seen, what he was, seemed to crash into him all at once. "Sir," Amara whispered, standing up on shaky legs. Kang flinched as if she had struck him. He couldn't bear it. He couldn't let her see him like this. A butcher, a monster, a failed king. Without a word, he turned his back on her and walked out of the room, retreating into the darkness of his private quarters, leaving the shattered empire behind him. The hallway leading to the master's suite was eerily quiet. The bodies had been moved, the blood mopped up by the cleanup crew, but the smell of violence, copper and cordite, hung heavy in the air. Amara walked past the confused guards. They didn't stop her. Perhaps they knew she had saved his life, or perhaps they were simply too terrified to intervene. She pushed open the heavy double doors. The room was dark, lit only by the spill of light from the ensuite bathroom. Amara followed the sound of running water. Kang Min-jae was standing at the sink, gripping the porcelain rims so hard his knuckles were white. He had stripped off his blood-soaked shirt. The water ran clear from the tap, but he was scrubbing his hands as if the stain went deeper than skin. He heard her enter. He didn't turn around. "Get out, Amara," he rasped. His voice was unrecognizable, a jagged ruin. "Take your passport. Take whatever cash you can find in the safe. Leave before the sharks come back." "No," Amara said. The word hung in the air, defiant and soft. Kang froze. He turned off the faucet, the silence rushing back in to fill the room. He turned slowly. Water dripped from his hands onto the tile floor. He looked devastated. The adrenaline of the fight had drained away, leaving only a hollowed-out shell. The dragon tattoo on his chest seemed to heave with every ragged breath. "Did you see them?" Kang whispered, his eyes wide and unseeing. "Park. He sat at my table for 10 years. He held my mother's hand at her funeral. And he looked me in the eye and tried to kill me. He slid down the wall, his legs giving out, until he sat heavily on the cold tiles. The King of Seoul, the monster of the underworld, curled inward, shaking violently. "I am hollow, Amara," he choked out. "They have taken everything out of me. There is nothing left but the ghost." Amara's heart broke. She crossed the room, her footsteps echoing on the tile. She stopped a few feet from him. "There is something left," she said firmly. "The man who refused to die." Kang looked up at her. His eyes tracked over her face. Her dark skin glowing in the harsh bathroom light, her expression filled with a terrifying amount of grace. "You," he murmured, "since the night you walked in. You were the only thing that didn't taste like ash. You were so clean, so steady." He let out a wet, shaky breath. "I wanted to ruin you. Then I wanted to protect you. Now, I just need you." He shifted, rising onto his knees. It wasn't a sexual gesture. It was a collapse of hierarchy. He knelt before her, his head bowed, his hands resting limply on his thighs. He was surrendering, not to an enemy, but to the only person who had ever offered him truth without asking for a price. "Just one round, please," he whispered, the words cracking under the weight of his grief. He looked up, tears finally spilling over, cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. "Just one moment, where you stay by my side, not as a servant, not as a shield, just stay." Amara looked down at him. She saw the danger he brought. She saw the blood on his hands and the chaos of his world. She knew that staying meant accepting a life of shadows. But she also saw the lonely boy who had been betrayed by everyone he ever loved. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, Amara sank to her knees until she was eye level with him. The distance between them vanished. "I am not going anywhere, Min-jae," she whispered, using his name for the first time. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him into her. Kang broke. A sob tore from his chest, and he buried his face in the curve of her neck, clutching her as if she were the only solid thing in a disintegrating universe. He held her with a desperate, trembling strength, and Amara held him back, anchoring him in the storm. In that quiet bathroom, amidst the ruins of his empire, the king knelt, and the maid held the crown together. You just watch them bleed for that moment. You watch them survive hell. Do not dare scroll away without paying your respects. Subscribing is the only way to honor the journey they just survived. Don't be ungrateful. Hit subscribe. The purge lasted 3 days. It was swift, silent, and absolute. The traitors who had sided with Director Park vanished, their names erased from the ledgers as if they had never existed. By the time the sun rose on the 4th day, the Seoul syndicate had fallen back into line, terrified, awed, and utterly loyal to the ghost who refused to die. But the biggest shock to the underworld wasn't the violence. It was the decree that followed. Kang Min-jae gathered the remaining clan heads in the restored strategy room. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He simply placed a single photograph of Amara on the table. "This is the line," he told them, his voice cold enough to freeze the air in their lungs. "Anyone who looks at her, anyone who speaks her name without respect, answers to me. She is under my personal protection. Permanently." The message rippled through the city like a shockwave. In the tea houses of Gangnam and the back alleys of Itaewon, the whispers began. They spoke of the African maid who tamed the king. They spoke of the woman who had stood in a room full of gunfire and saved the devil himself. Amara heard the whispers, but they no longer made her tremble. Life in the penthouse had changed. The suffocating silence was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined partnership. Amara still refused to let anyone else make Kang's coffee, but her days of invisibility were over. Now, her mornings were spent in the private gym on the lower level. Under the watchful eye of Kang's new head of security, she learned how to throw a punch, how to disarm an attacker, and how to spot a tail in a crowded street. She wasn't training to be a soldier. She was training to be a survivor in a world that allowed no weaknesses. 1 month after the coup, Amara stood on the penthouse balcony. The winter wind whipped at her dress, but she didn't retreat. She watched the sprawling, glittering expanse of Seoul, the city she had once feared, the city she now ruled from the shadows. The glass door slid open behind her. Kang stepped out. He looked different now. The hollow exhaustion was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused vitality. He wore his suit with the ease of a man who no longer felt the weight of the crown crushing his spine. He moved to stand beside her, leaning his elbows on the railing. He didn't try to touch her immediately. The tension between them was still there, but it was no longer the tension of fear. It was the magnetic pull of 2 stars orbiting the same center. "The board is asking when I will choose a new director," Kang said quietly. looking out at the skyline. "And what did you tell them?" Amara asked, turning to face him. Kang turned, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was a rare, precious thing, a smile that reached his eyes. "I told them I don't need a director. I have a conscience instead." Amara felt the warmth rise in her cheeks. "I am not your conscience, Minjae. I am just the woman who cleans up your mess." "You are the reason there is anything left to clean," he corrected gently. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the railing. His grip was warm, solid, and possessive. The scars on his knuckles were fading, but the memory of the night he knelt before her was etched into both of their souls. "It won't be easy, Amara," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, intimate register. "The peace is fragile. There will be others who try to take what we have. There will be wars." Amara looked at the man who terrified a nation. She thought of the girl she used to be, the frightened orphan running from Lagos with a fake passport, desperate to disappear. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had looked into the abyss and found a home. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. "I didn't stay because I wanted easy," she whispered. Kang pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her waist. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, a seal, a promise, a vow. "Then let them come," Kang murmured against her skin. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Amara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. Below them, the city lights burned like a billion watching eyes, waiting to see what the king and his queen would do next. She was ready.